Gonzaga played their most complete game of the season on Saturday at LMU with season best performances from Ike and Khalif Battle. Is the season finally turning around for the Zags?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Well, the Zags dropped 96 points on LMU, their fourth game in 7 days, but they sure did not look any worse for the wear in that one. We're going to talk about the game, the great performances from Ike and Khalif Battle, plus a really strong game, particularly in the first half for Michael Ajayi. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to answer some mailbag questions. It is a mailbag episode here on Monday. As a reminder, we're trying to do mailbags either on Mondays or on Tuesdays, depending on how much of a game we have to recap over the weekend. If you want to get involved in Mailbag Monday, you can email me your questions, andypatton013@gmail.com. You can also join the Locked On Zags Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. Just click that link. You'll be invited in. It is free to join. There's a spot to get your mailbag questions answered as well. First, though, before we get to those mailbag questions, we talk about this win for the Zags on Saturday at Gersten Pavilion against the Lions of LMU. The Zags roll to a 96-68 victory, 28-point margin for the Zags against a good LMU team, not a great LMU team. They struggled earlier in the season. They were kind of coming into, sort of limped their way into the conference slate this season, but we're coming off of a 21-point win over an Oregon State team that really up to that point still had aspirations of being an at-large contender. Now, the LMU loss very likely takes Oregon State out of that conversation. And in fact, we're going to talk more later in the show about kind of who is still in that conversation out of the WCC. But for LMU, they had a lot of momentum. They were playing a Gonzaga team that, again, had played against UCLA in LA on last Saturday, then played Pepperdine 2 days later, then flew back to Spokane to play Portland on Thursday, and then flew back down to LA to play LMU. You factor all that in. You factor in that LMU has a lot more size, some rim protection and Rick Isanza, some high-level wing scorers. Like, there was a lot about this game that felt kind of tenuous for Gonzaga. It felt like if they played like they did against Pepperdine, particularly in the second half, or really like they did even in games against Bucknell and Nichols and some of those other teams, that this might be a struggle for them. And that just wasn't the case. They had a bit of a lull in the start of the second half, which remains an issue for the Zags. But outside of that, this team flat out dominated the Lions for a comfortable victory. And it was really thanks to two players in particular, Ike and Khalif Battle, who both had, I think you could make a strong argument, the best individual performances of the entire season individual. We'll start with Ike. Ike was an absolute menace in this game. He finishes with 27 points. That is a season high for him. He also has 9 rebounds. He was 12 of 16 from the field. That included knocking down his only 3-point attempt. It was like in the middle of the second half, I think. It was just one of those plays where he was wide open from 3. It was within rhythm. As soon as he caught it, you could kind of tell he was going to shoot it. And I think he'd scored 4, maybe 6 in a row coming into that. And it was just like, what are you going to do? Like, it just felt like it sucked the air completely out of LMU when he hit that 3. Cause it's like, we can't stop this guy on the block. We can't stop him. There's nothing we can do against him. And now he's hitting 3s. And it just felt like that was really a defining moment in this game. Graham also had 2 possessions early in the game in the first half where he grabbed a rebound, and just due to where he got the rebound and where the guards were, he ended up bringing the ball up the court. And both times, we've seen Graham do this before. It's something that the bigs are kind of allowed to do in Mark Few's system, where if you get a long rebound and you're kind of already moving that way, just go. Like, we want to get out in transition, so it's okay to go. And usually when Graham does that, he'll take 3-4 dribbles, maybe get across half court, and then find a guard and kind of get Gonzaga into their offense. But twice in this game, when he did that, he just went all the way down on the block, turned, and started posting his guy up and scored. And one time it was a great decision. Both times it was a good decision, but once it was because a guard had picked him up, and I think presumably expected that he was going to get rid of the ball and then they could switch. But Graham smartly just kept going at the guard, eventually got him on the block and scored. And the next time it wasn't, I think it was Asante. If not, it was one of the other bigs for LMU, but you could see him directing other guys, like, get out of the way. I'm going to go on the block. I'm going to score. There's no passing on this possession. And why not? When he's playing that good, when he was just everything over his shoulder seemed to go in, let him cook. And I'm glad the Zags did that. And I'm glad he had the confidence and the wherewithal to just say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to take it. Probably the most important aspect of this game for Graham Ike, not just the 27 points, not just the 9 rebounds, not just the insanely efficient 12 of 16 shooting. Graham Ike did not have a single turnover or foul in this game. Now, LMU does not funnel their offense through the bigs at all. Rick Isanza is a very big player, but I think he scores like 2.5 to 3 points per game, and they just don't give him the basketball. The offense runs through Javon Porter, it runs through Will Johnston, it runs through Merk Filatsky. Like they don't run the offense through the bigs. So that's helped Graham avoid picking up fouls, but Braden Huff had 4. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, Graham deserves credit for not picking up any fouls in this game. I don't think that a good game for Graham is no fouls at all, necessarily. Big men getting a couple fouls a game is fine. Like, for Graham, it's less no fouls. It's more he was in foul trouble. But obviously, if you don't pick up any fouls, you're not going to get in foul trouble. So for the fact that he didn't get any fouls in this game is good. And the fact that he didn't turn the basketball over while scoring 27 points is incredible. This is the version of Graham Ike. He's not going to be this every game. He's not. It's not going to happen. Expecting him to never turn the ball over is frankly foolish. If you have a player with as much usage as Graham Ike, there are going to be turnovers. But in this game, LMU was sending 2. Sometimes they were sending 3, and he was still just scoring through contact, scoring through double teams without putting the ball on the deck, without unnecessary turnovers, without forcing passes that weren't there. It was a really, really strong performance and a reminder of how good this team can be when he is playing at that level. We also mentioned Khalif Battle. Really great game for him. I think pretty clearly in my mind, unless I'm not thinking of a game, the best game that he has played in a Gonzaga uniform. Most of his damage came early in the second half. He finished with 26 points. He had 4 rebounds and 3 steals. He was 10 of 12 from the field, an insanely efficient night from him. That included going 4 of 5 from 3, knocked down his only 2 free throw attempts as well. He did have 4 fouls. A lot of them picked up kind of in the middle of that second half, forced him to go to the bench fairly early in that half when he was really cooking, which was unfortunate timing. Some of them were just dumb fouls. Some of them were questionable calls, but the officiating wasn't a problem in this game. In fact, they were fairly loose with the officiating outside of one egregious call on Braden Huff, which we'll get to in a second. But Battle, that's still a bit of an issue for him. He's really physical. He's a bit hand checky. He's probably going to get in foul trouble more this year. That's kind of one of the things you deal with Khalif Battle. But what a great game from him. And more than that, again, we saw this in the Portland game as well. Mark Few's letting the players that aren't Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike cook, or Braden Huff when he's in the game. The offense was so focused on Nembhard making things happen or getting the ball to Graham or Braden and letting them go to work. And we had guys like Dusty Stromer and Khalif Battle and Nolan Hickman and Michael Ajayi who just weren't really able to get any kind of rhythm offensively outside of catch and shoot 3-point opportunities or transition. And that needed to change. And we saw that in the Portland game. And then we saw it again here in this game against LMU, where Khalif Battle, there's nobody in the WCC who can guard Khalif Battle, especially if he's going to his right off a screen. Nobody. And again, Ryan Nembhard going off of a screen, a lot of different things can happen because he has such incredible floor vision. He could make a pass to a big, he could go all the way to the rim, he could kick it out to a shooter. Khalif Battle going to his right off a screen is mostly going to result in Khalif Battle taking a shot. But there's not a problem with that against teams like LMU or really anybody except maybe St. Mary's in the WCC, because they're not going to be able to stop him. And that's what you see here in this game, 10 of 12, 26 points, just a really nice game from him. And I think finally starting to see Mark Few open up the offense a little bit. And I'm hopeful that that's going to continue to be the case. We saw Dusty Stromer take some mid-range jumpers. We just saw more versatility from this team offensively. And we mentioned him already, but I'll mention him again here. Michael Ajayi, fantastic first half from him. It was a little quieter in the second half, but 11 points for him, 4 of 5 shooting in the first half, finished with 15 points on 5 of 8 shooting. Like I said, a little quieter in the second half, but that's still a great, great, great game from him. He had a 3-pointer, early in the game. He had a breakaway dunk on a steal. He played really good defense against his former teammate, Javon Porter, where they were both together at Pepperdine last year. He had the pair of steals. Just a really great game from Michael Ajayi. We saw him start to look more comfortable. Again, that Portland game, he had 15 rebounds, which was fantastic. And I thought he played well offensively, but he only had 5 points, missed a bunch of shots. This game, those shots started to fall, and it really looked like the player that Gonzaga was hoping they were getting when he committed to the team this summer. A couple other good things from the Zags: 13 to 14 from the free throw line, only 6 total turnovers as a team. Ryan Nembhard had 11 assists. He didn't have a great offensive game outside of that, 10 points, but he was 4 of 11 from the field, just missed a lot of shots he normally makes, those mid-ranges that are just seem automatic for him. He missed a few of those in this one, but hard to complain about a game where you have 11 assists and 2 turnovers for Nembhard. The bad stuff in this game, most notably, was Braden Huff. Just did not have a good game. And it's pretty common for when one of the bigs between Ike and Huff has a great game, the other one typically doesn't because they don't play as much. But in this situation, it wasn't just that Braden had a bad game because he didn't play much. He didn't play well when he was on the floor. And it happens. 2 points. They were scored with like 90 seconds left in this game. He was 1 of 7 from the field with 4 fouls. One of those fouls I don't even think he jumped. He was standing. Jan Vide, for some reason, basically just threw the basketball into Braden Huff's hands, and they called a foul on him. It was literally one of the worst calls I've ever seen. It didn't end up being all that consequential, but it was shocking to me that the officials called that a foul. Like there was no contact whatsoever. So that was a bummer for Braden Huff, but just he doesn't have games like this very often. It's certainly not anything to be concerned about. But again, would be nice to see Graham and Braden both have a good game at the same time, but it's not super realistic because they don't play together ever. So they're typically not both going to play super effectively. We did see that earlier this week against Portland, I believe it was, where they both played well. But in this game, Braden just wasn't on. We also, once again, saw LMU play a little better than Gonzaga to start the second half. For the most part, Gonzaga led in the start of the second half, but ultimately by the time we got to the under 8 media timeouts, so the first 12-ish minutes of the second half, LMU had outscored Gonzaga 27-26. Now that means that Gonzaga's 18-point halftime lead was still a 17-point lead. So it's really, again, not super consequential that ended up being the case, but you'd still like to see Gonzaga not have a lull or have some kind of struggle to start the second half. And again, this was more of the middle of the second half where LMU caught fire. Will Johnson hit a couple threes. Javon Porter had some nice plays. It wasn't a super concerning thing, but since it has been such a theme of Gonzaga's season, I thought we would throw it in there here. And then Nolan Hickman, he made good decisions. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't play like super poorly, but he just didn't knock down shots. He was 2 of 8 from the field with 5 total points, 1 of 3, had a couple floaters that I thought were decent looks that just didn't go down. Again, not an overly concerning performance from him, but in a game where Gonzaga scores 96 points and wins by 28, you got to be a little nitpicky to find the things that weren't so good. And that would be Hickman and Huff not having their typically good performances. Well, we're going to switch gears here and answer some mailbag questions here. It is Monday after all. We got some questions about some transfers. We got a question about why some transfers seem to be a little slower to develop to catch on to Mark Few's system. We're going to talk about that and a few other things coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the conference college hoops action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and you will get $250 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets all in one place. So when you get hunked in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And if you're wanting to watch some potential, keyword potential, future Pac-12 squads on Monday tonight, South Florida is playing at Wichita State. FanDuel favors the Shockers by 8.5 points. If you want to have a vested interest in a game between two teams that maybe someday will end up in the same conference as Gonzaga, check that one out. Or there's many, many other lines on FanDuel right now, some future odds for college basketball, women's lines, all sorts of stuff. If you're interested in any of that, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. As a reminder, you will get started with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a win. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're now answering some mailbag questions here in the final 2 segments of the show. We got 3 questions from the Discord channel, and then we're closing it out with 3 questions from our buddy Jeff via Gmail. We'll get to those in the final segment. This first question here comes from Way of Life on Discord, who says, what makes the Zags system so difficult for transfers like Michael Ajayi to feel comfortable in? Well, I think it's I know this is kind of a BS answer, so we will get more into specifics, but it's going to be different for every player. Obviously, the complexities of the system for some players are not complex at all. For some, it does take them a little bit longer, and that could be a variety of factors, how much different that system is from the system they came from previously, their just ability to pick up new systems. I mean, some players are frankly going to be better or quicker learners than others. That's just human nature. I think for Ajayi specifically, and I think this is the case for a lot of transfers, specifically transfers that come from mid-major systems where they were kind of the man, like Malachi Smith or even like a Geno Crandall type. I think it's less the system and more the dramatic role change that they're going through. And I think that's pretty clearly the case with Ajayi. Because Ajayi, first of all, we think of him as a senior. He is a senior. I was going to say, is out of eligibility after this year. Technically, he is not. Now that we have had this junior college rule change, which allows him to have more years of eligibility, at least one more year of eligibility. But ultimately, he has only played 1 year of Division I college basketball. This is his second year at the D1 level. So the speed of the game, the talent of his teammates and the talent of the teammates around him, for all intents and purposes, this is only his second year at that level. It is dramatically different than junior college. Junior college is not the equivalent of high school, but it is probably closer to high school than Division I, or at least it's comparable, the jump. And so he spent 2 years at a junior college level where he was way better than the competition, averaging 25, 29 points per game. And he just crushed everybody at the junior college level. And then he goes to Pepperdine and instantly is a star. 11 two-point attempts per game. Like, he was the guy. And Lorenzo Romar's system was not complex. Get the ball to Michael Ajayi, get the ball to Javon Porter, get the ball to Houston Millette, let them shoot the ball, let them drive to the rim, let them try to score. That was it. It was a little bit more complex than that, but honestly, not much. Not much. So you go from a system that is more isolation basketball, more kind of pass and shoot type, and not really a lot of movement, off-ball movement, things like that, to a system at Gonzaga where there is more ball movement and there is more expectation of this is where this player is going to go, this is where they're going to go, et cetera, et cetera. And beyond that, the ask of Michael Ajayi is way different. He's not being asked to just take his guy off the dribble and try to score. He's not being asked to do the things that he was asked to do or kind of allowed to do, for lack of a better word, in that Pepperdine system. I also think, and I kind of hadn't really realized this until I was taking notes on this, and this is maybe something I'll flesh out more in the offseason with some more data behind it. But I believe that the power forward position feels like one of the more complex asks in Gonzaga's system. The point guard is obviously the toughest, and it's the toughest in most systems because they have the ball in their hands the most. The center position is a super high usage role, and there's a lot of being asked of like repositioning and things like that. And, you know, if you're getting double teamed to look for a pass or whatever, but mostly the center position is asked to demand the basketball, catch the basketball, turn and try to score the basketball. The point guard is asked to do a lot of different things. The wings, frankly, in Mark Few's system, I don't think are often asked to do enough. They are typically, you know, they're doing the motion offense. They sometimes do the pick and roll, but a lot of times they're asked to space the floor and hit threes, where the power forward, they flash the top of the key. They look to make an entry pass. They set a lot of screens. Like, there's a lot asked of the power forward. So I think the combination of playing one of what I think is the more versatile positions in Mark Few's system, combined with a role where he is no longer the focal point offensively, and frequently when he's on the floor, he's the 4th or 5th option offensively. I think that's mostly where Michael's struggles have come from. And it's why in the last couple of games, we have seen Michael look better, because pretty much every time he catches the basketball against against LMU and against Portland, he caught the ball, he turned, he put the ball on the deck and drove towards the rim. That was an intentional decision by the coaching staff to tell him, hey, play ball, go look to score. We would rather you do that than get in your own head too much and make mistakes and try to pass the ball to players who aren't ready for it, which is what we saw in that Pepperdine game. I think, again, looking back at some of the power forwards Gonzaga's added in the transfer portal, it hasn't been a huge position of of transfer portal success. Jonathan Williams and Kyle Wiltshire are two of the very obvious counterexamples, but both of them sat a year. So they had an entire year to learn the system kind of behind the scenes. Jeremy Jones wasn't featured the same way, but he also had a year to sit in the system as well. So we haven't really had a lot of guys come in right away at that position. And so I think that some of it is positional based. Some of it is just for him a very dramatically different role than what he'd played, not just at Pepperdine, but prior to that, obviously, the junior college level as well. Next question here comes from Jackie Daytona on Discord, who says, we have 2 one-year transfer guards that have been absolutely fantastic for the Zags. Ajayi has granted you one offer. With the current lineup and how this team functions, do you choose Battle being replaced by Malachi Smith, or do you wish Battle to stay? The choice is yours. Let the games begin. Semantics for me, I'll say that Gonzaga's had other very good one-year transfer guards. I know if we're talking the very recent past, Smith and Battle are the two, but Jordan Matthews and Byron Wesley and many others that I'm forgetting as well. But in this exercise with this current Gonzaga roster, would I rather have Battle or would I rather replace him with Malachi Smith? Give me Khalif Battle. And honestly, it's not that close. And that has nothing to do with Malachi Smith. That is not an insult on Malachi Smith. Battle is such a unique and dynamic player. And I think some of what we haven't seen him be unlocked yet. And I think some of that is of the fault of the coaching staff for not letting Khalif Battle cook, not letting him do what he's capable of doing. Malachi Smith is a better three-point shooter than Khalif Battle. They're both high-volume three-point shooters. Battle's just not as consistent as a three-point shooter. I know he's just coming off a game where he went 4 or 5 from 3, so he can do it, and he can do it at that level. But Battle's likely to finish the season somewhere between 34 and 36% from 3, 37, somewhere in there. Malachi Smith was 50% in conference play. He's a better three-point shooter. But I think Battle's a better defender. He's a bigger guard. He's more stout, and he is a menace at getting to the line, converting from the free throw line, getting to the rim, doing all that stuff. I think Khalif Battle is a better basketball player than Malachi Smith. And I think while this team could use more shooting, the main skill that Malachi would bring that is better than Khalif Battle's, I don't think it is enough of a difference between the two of them to pick him over Battle. I would rather have Battle, and I am hoping that what we saw in that game against LMU is a sign of Battle's performance to come, which will really kind of help hammer that point home. Final question of the segment comes from T_Z117 on Discord, who says, I heard you mention on one of the latest episodes that you keep the show very optimistic and some of the listeners wish you were more critical of Coach Few. For the record, I don't think there is a single podcast on the Locked On Network where there are not listeners who think the host should be more critical. That's just a nature of the beast with regards to podcasting. Anyway, TZ117 continues. Do you have any criticism or things you would change about Coach Few's system? Yeah, I think a great way to hear more detail on this would be to listen to the New Year's resolutions episode that came out on the 1st of January. There was a full segment dedicated basically to what I think Mark Few's resolutions should be. And it was some criticism of the way that this team has operated so far. But some of those things have been happening in the last couple of weeks, or the last couple of games, in particular, the Portland and the LMU game. So it's a kind of a good time to bring them up. I felt, and we kind of already talked about it a little bit, so I won't rehash it too much, but I felt that Gonzaga's offense was too reliant on Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike. And when Huff's in the game, Braden Huff. But it was too reliant on pick and roll with Nembhard, him getting the actions going, him making plays happen, or the team dumping the ball to Ike or Huff, and then kind of just getting out of the way and letting those guys go. And if they get double teamed, you swing it out, you bring it back to the top of the key, you reset. Hickman and Stromer and Battle, I think we're not being allowed to play as freely as they're capable of, and we're not able to make things happen in ways that I thought they should have been. And I was critical of Mark Few saying that needs to change. If those guys don't feel empowered to put the ball on the deck and try to score, they don't feel empowered to call for a screen and try to make something happen, that's a problem, because Ryan Nembhard is, like I said on that show, he's allowed to have bad games. He doesn't have to be perfect, but the problem for Gonzaga is if Ryan Nembhard has a bad game and they almost lose to Pepperdine, that's an issue. That's a big issue. And I think that Mark Few, I do not think he heard me. I do not think he listens to the show and made any changes based on that. That would be very insane. But I do believe that was a conscious decision to let Khalif Battle get more actions, to have Dusty Stromer be more aggressive hunting his shot, Michael Ajayi putting the ball on the deck and trying to score at the rim. Those are things that weren't happening earlier in the year, and they're happening now. To me, that is signs of growth from Coach Few, him making adjustments, him doing things differently. And I think those were the main criticisms I had. That doesn't mean that he's perfect. He is far from perfect. The Zags are still struggling to start second halves, which to me means that they are either not anticipating what the opposing team is going to do differently in the second half, which is a coaching issue, or they are not being aggressive enough at making changes themselves and kind of just saying, well, we have a lead at halftime, so we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, as opposed to looking to try to do things differently or more efficiently. There are still areas that need to grow. That is still something that is a concern for this team and will trip them up if they don't make fixes there. But I'm happy to see the team seemingly be more willing to let other players that aren't Nembhard and the bigs make something happen offensively. Well, folks, their path to a 3 or even a 4 bid WCC at this point in the season. We're going to discuss that, plus a great week for the women's basketball team. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, conference play is here, and there's nothing better than the atmosphere of a college basketball conference game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life for home games, Zombie Nation blaring, and more. And Game Time now has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of different tickets. And it's not just for basketball, but concerts, comedy shows, theater, and more. Whether it's Game Time's ticketing coverage, their lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app feature, Game Time has you covered. Gonzaga's taking on Oregon State in Corvallis on January 16th. Folks, I'm going to be in the house for that game. If you want to come say hi and you don't have tickets yet, right now you can get them for just $17 a piece in the upper balcony. They also have sideline tickets available for just $26 in section 12. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, closing out our mailbag section of the show for this week. On Mailbag Monday, we got 3 questions from Jeff via Gmail. This first one from Jeff: if the WCC is going to be a 3-bid league, Gonzaga, Washington State, St. Mary's, and San Francisco are going to have to separate themselves from the rest of the conference, probably by several games. If any or all of those 4 teams went 14-4 in WCC play, would that be enough to see a third conference team get a bid in March? Or would the WCC still be a 2-bid league? And if Gonzaga were to say go 16-2, which 2 of Wazoo, St. Mary's, and San Francisco would benefit the most from a win over Gonzaga? So yeah, I don't see the WCC, certainly not as a 4-bid league. That would be shocking. I'm honestly pretty out on it being a 3-bid league right now as well. Part of that is the fact that basically every team in the SEC seemingly deserves to be in the NCAA tournament outside of South Carolina. We also have to look at the other kind of high-level non-power conferences like the A10, which is playing really well right now. They have 4 or 5 teams that are going to be in that conversation. They'll probably ultimately only get 3, maybe 4, but they're going to be in that mix. Mountain West has a few teams that are down. They're probably not going to be 6 like they've been in the past, but maybe they're 4, maybe they're 3. That might open up a spot for the WCC, but ultimately both San Francisco and Washington State have enough warts on their resume right now that they have to be, their margin of error is very thin, very, very thin. I spoke about this on the live show Saturday morning, 9 a.m. with Zach Farmer, the host of the unofficial WCC Hoops podcast. We were previewing that evening game between San Francisco and Washington State, which was ultimately won by the Cougars, and kind of saying, hey, whoever wins this game is in the driver's seat for a potential at-large bid, but the other team is going to be in trouble. And that ended up being San Francisco, who lost that game. They needed to beat one of the Tigers. They played Clemson and Memphis. They lost both those games. I really think one of those games being a W would have really helped them. They also have a road loss to Bradley. The fact that it's on the road helps, but with that loss, with the 2 losses to Clemson, Memphis, now with already a loss to Wazoo, this team needs to be pretty perfect. If they go 14-4 in conference play with the 3 non-conference losses, I don't see a 7-loss San Francisco team in the NCAA tournament. If they're a 4-loss conference team, even if they beat Gonzaga or they beat St. Mary's, that means that they took a loss somewhere else. Like, I just don't see it. I don't see it. Wazoo's in a better spot. They're in a better spot. They beat Bradley. who they also played. They beat Nevada. They also beat Boise State, which is San Francisco's best win. For Washington State, it's one of their better wins. They beat San Francisco in the head-to-head. Obviously, there'll be a return game between those two, but for right now, they have the advantage there. I think they have a better shot. They only have 3 losses. Their 3 losses are to Iowa, SMU, and UW. UW is not a great loss, but frankly, it is going to not be held against them the same way that Bradley will. Whether that's fair or not, especially right now with Ken Pom favoring Bradley over UW, I don't know, but the committee will look at Washington State losing to Washington as a rivalry game and against a Big Ten team as opposed to losing to a mid-major team. That's just the reality of that situation. In terms of who benefits the most from beating Gonzaga, it would be San Francisco at this point. But again, San Francisco would have to pretty much win out if they don't win the WCC tournament. I think their margin for error right now is maybe one more loss, maybe, whereas Wazoo's got a little bit more room for error. And again, if Wazoo runs through the WCC, wins most of their games, or if they make it to the championship game in the WCC tournament, that could potentially put St. Mary's in a position where they're not as comfortable for making the tournament. So I just have a hard time seeing how the planets align for the WCC to be a 3-bid league. It's not going to be 4. I think it's has to go nearly perfectly for it to be 3. And ultimately, if I was a betting man, I would say it's going to be a 2-bid league as it typically is. Next question again from Jeff. He says, with the way San Diego State and Utah State are both playing and have been playing for several years now, it looks like Gonzaga, SDSU, and Utah State are going to form a really strong top of the future Pac-12. Other than the possibility of Memphis joining, is there anyone else who could join those 3 at the top of the conference? Boise State and Washington State have played well over the past few years. Perhaps those 2. Yeah, Boise State's definitely the next one. You can make an argument, Boise. I don't know. I don't think there's a strong argument for Boise State ahead of any of those 3. I think those are the top 3 right now, with Utah State just doesn't even matter who coaches that team. Clearly, they just continue to win and succeed at super high levels. But Boise State is next. They've been in the tournament most of the last few years. They're very consistent under Coach Leon Rice. I think they're the pretty clear 4th right now and will contend to be a top 3 team, will contend for consistent berths in the NCAA tournament. Honestly, I don't think Wazoo's next. I think it's Colorado State, and I know they haven't been very good this year. And certainly if they were to lose Coach Nico Medved, that would change the conversation. But with Wazoo, this team's been great, and they have succeeded despite losing many, many players to injury. But David Riley is still unproven. We haven't really seen him recruit. We haven't seen what he's able to do. Like he's still unproven, I think is the easiest answer to that question. So I trust Colorado State a little bit more than I trust Wazoo right now. Certainly Memphis would be a great addition. St. Mary's would be right in the conversation as a top 3 team in this conference if they were to join as well. But yeah, I think right now it's that conference is going to be carried in the short term by Gonzaga and San Diego State, with Utah State, Boise State, and to an extent Colorado State and Wazoo kind of in that middle section as well. Final question of the show from Jeff here. He says, the Gonzaga women look like a whole new team now that they are healthy. Unfortunately, the damage to their resume appears to be enough that it is still auto bid or bust for the Lady Zags. What expectations do you have for this team this year? Yeah, they looked great last week. And it wasn't just having Taylor Dalton and Breece Allen be unhealthy. That was a huge part of it. Certainly from a fatigue perspective, just having more bodies, having more depth on the bench is critical. But Mott Hybens has looked fantastic in her last 2 games. And I think that's been a huge part of it. She had 19 against UP. She had 23 against Santa Clara. A really, really great week from her. That is a tremendous, tremendous boost for a team that had been relying solely on Vonnie Ejim in the front court. To now have Hybens playing like that is really going to help. But yeah, we're going to learn a lot about this team in the next week or so. They got Washington State on Saturday. They got Portland next week. They're hosting Portland next week. They're at Washington State. Those are 2 of the most important games in conference play remaining, and they're the next 2 games. So we'll have a good sense of where this team is at. But you're absolutely right. There is zero chance that Gonzaga makes the WCC, or excuse me, makes the NCAA tournament if they don't win the WCC. 0. And so I don't want to say nothing else matters, because how you do for the rest of the season will determine your seeding in the NCAA tournament. Like if they lose half the rest of their WCC games, but still win the WCC tournament, they're going to get a really crappy seed. Whereas if they win out from here on out, they're going to get a much better seed. And obviously winning the WCC regular season gives you a double bye into the WCC tournament, which makes it much easier to get into that championship game. So it's not that it doesn't matter, but ultimately there is one game that matters far more than any other game Gonzaga could play this year, and that is that championship game in WCC tournament in Las Vegas, because if they don't win that one, they're not going to be dancing this year. Going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thank you so much To those of you who have made the show your first listen or your first watch of the day, we'll be back getting you ready for the game against San Diego on Wednesday. And then we'll, of course, get you ready for that big-time matchup against Washington State on Saturday for the Zags. I will also get you some other coverage on the AP poll, some other fun stuff going on this week as well. Thanks again, folks. Have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, as always, go Zags.